Welcome to the audience at the Area University Library here at Maxwell, and to all those that are attending online. Today, we're very pleased to have a presentation. Our speaker is Dr. Joshua Sipper, and his title of his presentation is the cyber, as you see on the slide, cyber meta reality beyond the metaverse. I'm just going to read a couple of the highlights from his bio. He's very accomplished, and then I'll turn it over to you. And Dr. Joshua Sipper is currently assigned to the Air Command and Staff College. He's a professor of cyber warfare studies. He completed his doctorate work at Trident University in September 2012. He earned a PhD in educational leadership, emphasizing e-learning leadership. Dr. Sipper's previous degrees were obtained from Troy, one of my favorite old schools, and he got a Master of Education there, and Faulkner with a BS in English. Dr. Sipper is a veteran. He's honorably served in the U.S. Air Force and the intelligence career field, and he's also worked for Lockheed Martin in a similar capacity as that on the U-2 program. Sounds exciting. I'd like to hear a little bit more about that. Well, recently, Dr. Sipper shifted his focus into the cyber realm for 7 years as a systems engineer, Chief of Cyber Standardization, Evaluation, and Cyber Exercise Manager for General Dynamics at the Air Force 26th Network Operations Squadron. He then completed a 9-year tour as a civil servant in the Air Force Cyber Career Field at the Curtis E. LeMay Center for Doctorate in Development Education. And just prior to his appointment to ACSC, he was a professor of cyber warfare studies at the Air Force Cyber College, where he designed several cyber courses, including Cyber ISR, Cyber EW, and Cyber and Information Warfare Capabilities and Trends. He's got numerous publications, including a paper entitled The Cyber Microbiome and the Cyber Metareality, published at the IARIA Cyber 2020 conference, and he won an award for best paper for that paper. He also has a book called The Cyber Meta-Reality Beyond the Metaverse, and that was published in 2022. And his interests include cyber operations, ISR, electromagnetic warfare, and cyber warfare. And we're very pleased to have you come and speak to us, and I'll let you expand whatever I messed up or missed out on that. Welcome again.
Thank you, Jeff. I really appreciate it. And thank you, everybody who's in the room today, and also everyone on Zoom. Thank you for being here with us today. Just to kind of let you know, here is the book. They actually have a copy of this here at the library. So anyone who wants to go and check out, this is one of my author copies, you can't have it, but I will pass around the room for anybody who wants to thumb through it and just look at it. I'm sorry, people, you'll have to go find a virtual copy to look at if you're on Zoom. It is available, though, for you to check out here at the library if you have an opportunity. And before we get started, just to kind of give you a little bit of background, a little bit of explanation, the title of this book, a lot of people get very confused and even a little scared about the title of this book, because you're like, what is he talking about? What in the world is the metaverse in the first place? Because really what I'm talking about is something that's larger than the metaverse. But to explain just very briefly what the metaverse is, it's actually what most people would consider a representation of reality in a virtual space. And kids are always, playing video games online. They're talking to other friends, and they're interoperating as human beings within this metaverse. It also spans into augmented reality and virtual reality, two large technologies that are growing, ever expanding. You see those being used by companies like Google and Microsoft and Amazon, and of course Meta, which used to be called Facebook, who are expanding rapidly into the metaverse and into this space in which we're living. But the cyber meta reality that I'm going to be talking about today is much larger than that. And I'm going to get into some details about what that really means as we go through the brief and talk about what it actually comprises, what it means to be a human being there, and how we're moving very rapidly into this, what I call an infinitely expanding data space. So Sunny, if you could do the next slide for me, ma'am. So the purpose of the book. Now, I can give you a lot of different purposes for why I wrote this book. One, of course, has to do with the paper that I won the best paper award for at the conference. That was a big push in that direction, because my dean at the Cyber College said, I bet you could write a book about this. And I said, I bet you're right. So I went ahead and started writing a book about it, and was able to kind of suss out and science out a lot of what I thought was missing in our understanding of cyberspace and what I call the cyber meta reality. But in order to do that, you have to start with some very fundamental concepts, things like ontology, ontogeny, cosmology, and some taxonomies to build that off of. In astrophysics, for instance, there are ontologies, ontogenies, cosmologies, and taxonomies already built because we've been building those for hundreds of years. Been able to science that out over time. Same thing with anatomy and physiology and biology. We have built these systems of understanding about these parts of our physical world by using these concepts of ontology, ontogeny, cosmology, etc. So my purpose, a big purpose of this book, is to do that very thing, to start a conversation about what the cyber meta reality really is, because it is a new reality in which human beings are choosing to live every day. I'll give a little more detail on that in a minute. Ontology just has to do with the nature and theory of being, and that refers not only to the cyber meta reality itself, but also to human beings who are living in that space and choosing to live in that space. Ontogeny has to do with the evolution or the changes that this meta reality is going through as we change it and as it changes with us, and also how we're changing as we interface with it and with each other inside of it. So a lot of complexity going on there. Cosmology is the origin itself. So we talk a lot about the origin of the universe, the origin of humanity. And of course, science explores that in great depth in a lot of different ways because we've built the capabilities to be able to delve into those and actually sort of what I call science out those different things, explore them and understand them at many different levels. And then finally, taxonomy. And taxonomies are built to explain systems by using naming and classification. So we see this all the time. If you take a taxonomy, this is just a notional version of one taxonomy, one possible taxonomy within, could be hundreds or thousands or even millions of taxonomies that could be built in cyberspace. Usually when we look at this, we look at it from the species, genus, and so on, from a physical standpoint, like animals or human beings or whatever it may be. In this case, we start at the domain level, sort of the bottom of the inverted pyramid, or top of the inverted pyramid, and say, okay, well, the domain in this case will be the cyber domain. You go next to the kingdom, which would be fauna. And I talk about fauna, cyber fauna, and cyber flora in the book when I talk about the cyber biome and what that is in this expanding data space. The phylum would be wireless, class, autonomous, order, signal, family, code, genus, artificial intelligence, and then finally the species would be drone. So you can see how it kind of breaks down. And again, this isn't perfect. I'm just trying to start something here. I'm trying to start people thinking about theory and meta theory in cyberspace. We talk a lot about over in the air power department about air power theory, right? We talk about war theory. We talk about international relations theory, those different kinds of theory. And one piece of theory that I start with, actually, if you take the term meta reality, there is actually a theoretical term for that. A lot of times we talk about reality and constructivism, or realism, constructivism, those kind of things. For meta reality is actually something called transcendental dialectical critical realism. There is actually, and that term was developed back in 2010, and I can't remember the name of the gentleman who developed it, but it's been around for a very short period of time, and it kind of was an outgrowth of some other discoveries and concepts in astrophysics that I'll get to here in just a moment. So Sonny, let's go to the next slide, please, ma'am. All right, so these are the four kind of broad categories I'm going to try to delve into as we go through the discussion today. First off, understanding what the cyber meta reality is. I'll say it in a second. Defining and managing data in this context, the context of the cyber meta reality. Analyzing the meta reality multidisciplinarily, or in multiple disciplines, across multiple disciplines. And finally, evaluating how data exists and flows in an infinitely expanding data space. And this kind of speaks a bit to this picture you see here on your right up on the screen. If you just go back to the 1970s and you go forward, you can actually take this pie slice of data and go all the way back to the origin of human thought and speech and information. But this just goes from the 1970s forward. And you can see that as we go forward in time, information and data are expanding rapidly, continuously. and seemingly infinitely out into the future. Because as we produce more data, we produce more data, and we produce more data, and it's an exponential effect. I'll talk a little bit more toward that as we go through. So next slide, please. All right, a couple of propositions. If you're looking for something that's kind of a thesis of the book, this would be, I guess, where I would start. The first proposition: many humans are in or already have moved into this infinite data space. Now, you could argue that, but if you look at China, which holds how many billion? 1.9 billion, something around there. India, about the same. They are massively invested in cyberspace. They're massively invested in the metaverse. They're massively invested in the cyber meta-reality. Now, it may look different from ours, and that's part of the point of the whole meta-reality thing, is because their cyberspace looks different from our cyberspace in a lot of different ways, in fundamental and important ways. But you see, just across those two countries, which make up a large portion of human population on the planet, it's a massive complement of human beings who have decided to make a home in the cyber meta-reality. How many of you have one of these? I bet you all do. If I brought in a sledgehammer and asked you to smash it right now, and I just saw all of you flinch a little bit, and I started at $100, how long would it take me to get to an amount that you would actually smash that device, which holds a big portion of your life? You're a cyborg and you don't even realize it. We all are. We're connected to these things, and we're connected to them through this space. We're connected to them because we care about this space. We care about the things we do there. We care about the people we meet there. We care about the relationships that we're formulating there. And that kind of leads to the second proposition. Every human is affected by and tied to the cyber meta-reality biome and microbiome. And I say every human being, and I mean that, because even if you were to go out into the wilds of the desert islands or whatever they may be, where human beings maybe don't have technology, but I can guarantee you that another human being who is aware of technology has been there. They've taken pictures, they've taken videos, they've taken recordings of some sort, and they brought it back and they put it into the cyber meta-reality. So those people, whether they know it or not, are still being affected by it. They're still being engaged in it in some way or fashion. And this finally leads to the last statement. This changes not only individual perceptions and management of data, but the fundamental state in which humans exist. And that's really, the crux of where I'm leading to with the theory and meta theory about cyberspace and cyber meta-reality in this book. So next slide, please, Sonny. Thank you. There we go. All right. So the first piece, understanding the cyber meta-reality. Now, I'm not going to guarantee you that at the end of this, you will completely understand the cyber meta-reality, because I certainly still don't. And there's still a long way to go to actually get to a really expanded view of what it's all about. But the way that I define it in the book, and it's based off of that transcendental dialectical critical realism concept that I talked about at the beginning of the talk, it's a real reality about and comprised of other realities. It's a multiverse. It's a multiverse that we can actually experience and understand. Now, when somebody talks about the multiverse in terms of Doctor Strange or something along those lines, that multiverse that is explained by astrophysics is one that you can't sense. We live in this reality, and this is the reality we experience and understand. And we can't touch or reach into or experience or understand any other reality other than this one, because we are hemmed in by our senses and by our ability to just function in this reality in which we now live. But in cyberspace, in the cyber meta-reality, we are constantly touching on other realities. We're constantly delving into other people's spaces. Everyone creates their own reality. And that leads to inviting others in and making common data with them. That involves people's realities who don't agree, and they collide. And sometimes they shatter. They produce fractals, infinite data realities. That's what I was talking about a moment ago, how whenever you come in together, you are throwing off more and more and more and growing more and more and more. And this heads toward chaos computing. You've probably heard of deterministic computing, which is what we currently use as far as traditional computing is concerned, where it's all ones and zeros. You're going to have a deterministic output. And then there's quantum computing, which is probabilistic computing, where it looks at all the possibilities at once and then comes to a determination based on probabilities. And then there's possibilistic computing, which is chaos computing. It's trying to look at all possibilities, which is a whole different thing going out into the future. And we're heading that direction in a pretty fast way. Much faster toward quantum right now than anything else, but we're going to get to at least the thought patterns that go along with possibilistic computing. Next slide, please. All right, so defining and managing data in this infinitely expanding data space. Data salience, context, right? Context. We were having our instructor prep a while ago. We were talking about quotes that you pull out of text. Well, you can pull a quote out of text, but what's the first thing you do when you do that? You take it out of context, right? You have to read it in context to truly understand it. And that's the same way with data in the cyber meta reality. Data salience is based off of the context in which you're seeing and understanding that data. Artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning, these kinds of technologies can help with that, because from a semantic point of view, they can actually sort and parse and help you get down to a base understanding of what that's all about. And it helps you to determine the usefulness of the data. That's really the bottom line. How useful is this data from a semantic point of view? How can I use it? How's it going to benefit me? And how's it going to benefit other people within this expanding data space? And of course, you have data security. You want to make sure that you have confidentiality. You want to have data integrity. All those things are very important outside of just availability itself in the cyber meta reality. The piece that we're having a tough time wrapping our heads around ultimately, though, is this last piece, data meaning or semiotics. I don't know if you've ever heard the term semiotics before. Maybe you have, maybe you read a bit about semiotics, but semiotics all has to do with understanding, has to do with meaning, making meaning, actually having meaning. Now, I am a father to 2 children. Some of you may have children, or if you don't, you have relationships that mean something to you. Why do those relationships mean something to you? There's something constructed there over time, right? It's something outside of knowledge and wisdom. It's about understanding. When we educate other people, what are we really trying to get to? Are we trying to get to wisdom? I submit you're trying to get to understanding. You're trying to get to the point where it means something to them. It's that, the difference between the cognitive and psychomotor and affective domains of learning. You really want to get to the affective domain, because that's when they take it in. That's when they really believe it. And that's when they really care about it. And that's what a lot of data scientists are trying to get to with artificial intelligence and machine learning and deep learning, to the point where they can really understand the meaning behind the data. Now, I don't know if you can ever get there. I really don't, because I don't know if it's possible to teach a machine how to care. I don't know if it's possible to teach a machine how to get to that point. But I will say that's the direction a lot of this data and this understanding in this reality are heading. So next slide, please.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. It's okay. Sometimes it takes a second. So the next piece is analyzing the meta-reality multidisciplinarily. And I think I made this word up, but that's okay. It just means, in a multidisciplinary way, through multiple disciplines. I had a related paper published at an IEEE conference in Dublin a few years ago that had to do with this topic. And after I did the online talk, it was during COVID, so we had to do it all online. One of the people in the virtual crowd asked the question, do you see this concept of the cyber meta reality expanding into other disciplines? Like, could you have cyber archaeologists in the future, or cyber anthropologists, or cyber astrophysicists, things like that? And I went, wow, I had never thought of that. Thank you. That's a great thing to think about. But that's really, in order to get to that data salience and meaning and understanding, that's where we kind of have to go. And there's a large portion, or I won't say a large portion of the book, but at least the first part of the book is a lot about that. It gets into the sort of metaphysical pieces and philosophical pieces of what it means to be a human being in the cyber meta reality, what it is in the first place. It talks about, like I said, the whole TDCR, the transcendental dialectical critical realism piece. It gets into those. But being able to teach that across all of these disciplines is a really important part of helping humans, to understand what it is. and asking the question, are we categorizing data meaningfully? Are we actually taking all of this data and then putting it where it needs to go so people can understand it in the best way possible? So just some important pieces of that. Next one, please, Sonny. I think this should be the last big slide. Okay, evaluating how data exists and flows. So as I mentioned a while ago, right up front when we're talking about cosmologies and origins and things like that, one of the cosmological concepts that you hear a lot of astrophysicists use is about the expanding universe that we live in. That as physical matter expands out, it expands faster and faster and faster and farther and farther and farther. So the exponential expansion of the physical universe in which we live, stars and planets and all matter moving rapidly away from each other. That is exactly what we're seeing in this data space, is that phenomenon of information that is expanding in an exponential fashion, farther and farther and farther and faster and faster and faster all the time. Also, if you look at data and information in the context of the cyber meta reality versus the physical universe, you begin to understand that it's not in complete tune with the first law of thermodynamics, which is, anybody know? That matter cannot be created or destroyed. It only changes form from one form to another. Well, in the cyber meta reality, if you're supplanting matter with data, because there's no matter in here. There's energy, but there's not physical matter in the cyber meta reality. It's information. Is information being created all the time? Absolutely. Is it expanding rapidly and exponentially out into infinity as far as we can tell? Absolutely. So what do you do with that from a fundamental physics sense? Where do you go with that? Where do you take it? I'm not saying I have the answer. I'm just saying we have to ask that question, because that'll help us to understand how we're supposed to go forward and move forward within this kind of data space and this kind of reality. And then finally, data creates new realities and ripples in those realities within the cyber meta reality. And that's just kind of the bottom line for a lot of this. So let's hit the next slide. And I think this is the conclusion. So I won't go any farther because I want to leave some room for questions. I've already talked long enough. If you want to go into the next slide, Sonny, it has my contact information, and I'll be happy to take questions from in the room, from Zoom folks, whoever would like to ask. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. I know it's a lot. Yes, sir.
You talked earlier about the difference between cyber meta realities in China and the West, or America or something. Explain some more on that, please.
So if you know anything about how China has essentially set up its internet, you hear of the Great Firewall of China. The data there is extremely controlled. They don't allow many, if any, outside sources of information and data to their people on the surface web. Now, there is another portion of the web out there called the dark web. That's part of where my concept for the cyber microbiome came from, because we as human beings, we have in our physical makeup something called a microbiome that is actually many orders of magnitude larger than our human cells. Your physical body is actually more non-human than human. Well, the internet, or the cyber meta reality, is actually more dark and deep web than it is surface web. So through this dark web space, you can actually get data through VPNs, virtual private networks, that you couldn't otherwise. That's where a lot of humanitarian groups in countries like North Korea, China, Iran, etc., are able to get data and actually share data between each other without being caught by the secret police, things of that sort. So that in and of itself is just one little piece of how different a cyber space, or a piece of the larger cyber meta reality, would look between a communist country that's information restricted and a Western country that's very information explosive. So it's just the whole philosophy, the whole understanding of how to even deal with data, control data, or release data is totally different. If that helps.
Thank you.
We got any online?
Looks like we got some people perhaps typing some in.
Okay. Maybe they're talking to each other. This guy's off his rocker.
How about another definition, Josh, about the biodome?
Oh, the biome, or
Biome.
the microbiome or the biome?
Oh,
Because there's, okay, so the cyber biome, okay, in this world in which we live as human beings in several different physical biomes and ecosystems. A biome consists of fauna and flora, so animals and plants, essentially, on a macro scale. So, and all of them balance each other out, right? Because, you know, the plants need the carbon dioxide, the animals need the oxygen, the animals eat the plants, you know, the plants eat the animals after they die, those kinds of things, all this balance that's going on there. Well, in cyberspace, I have classified in the book several different, and this is not an exhaustive list, different types of cyber fauna and cyber flora. And I classify them by whether or not they can move under their quote unquote on power through the cyber Metareality or not. So a fauna would be maybe something like a worm, you know, sort of like the Stuxnet worm that can move on its own through space, through data space, and infect other computers and things like that. And a fauna might be something like a database that stays pretty, you know, solid. It changes, but it stays in one space in general. You know, those are loose examples to kind of help define that. The microbiome is what lies beneath the surface, the stuff that we don't see, like the dark web, like archive data and the deep web, and those different pieces that we don't, most people just deal with the surface web all the time. I will say on my home laptop, I have the onion router, I have Tor, which it helps you to establish that VPN access to the dark web. I don't do anything bad out there, so I'm not going to get arrested. I'm just going out there to see how it works, because I'll go on DuckDuckGo and, you know, type in search terms and look and see what kind of data I can glean from there. And of course, like I said, there are humanitarian groups. There's actually, I just read an article today that there is a new darkverse that's being, so like the metaverse on the surface web, like all these large companies are bringing together, like Meta, et cetera, and Google and so on. There are actually people on the dark web who are building a darkverse that is a lot like the metaverse, but just on the dark web. So it's very complex and a lot of data moving through a lot of different spaces, and trying to understand that. But that underlying, that what you don't see, what's beneath the surface, is sort of the cyber microbiome that I refer to. If that helps with definitions, for definition's sake. And I try not to delve too much into that today. I kept it really more about the meta-reality, because once you start getting into the biome and microbiome, it gets even more complex, because then you're getting down into the weeds a little bit. But the book actually details, you know, how I've constructed the concepts about those from a theoretical and meta-theoretical standpoint, to try to help people to begin to understand, okay, this isn't just a thing you do. This is a place you go. This is a place you live. This is a place you're experiencing on, brain chemical levels, and that's significant for humanity, I believe.
I got a couple things here. It's apparent that present and future warfighters will have to operate in the cyber domain. How would you advise national security decision makers as to whether DoD should establish a separate cyber force?
Okay, great question. And I've gotten that question quite a few times in other talks that I've given. I think we're at the point right now where people are obviously already thinking about establishing a separate cyber force. The question is, well, there's several different questions. One is, where do you put it? A lot of people have been leaning toward Army, because, you know, Air Force has Space Force, essentially as a subordinate level type. Navy already has Marines. So it makes sense that if we do have a cyber force, it would probably go Army. Not to mention that, you know, you have this head of cybercom is an Army general, General Nakasone. Not to mention that Army SEMA is expanding into a lot of different spaces. I think it's probably a good idea in the future. As far as can we do it right now, I think it would be a hard sell just from a fiscal standpoint, also from a manning standpoint, because anytime that and we're already having manning trouble across the services, as I'm sure everyone in this room knows, Whenever you establish something like the Space Force, it didn't come out of nowhere. It wasn't like automatically you had a bunch of guardians who just kind of sprung up from the ground. They had to be taken from somewhere, and they were borrow and steal from services, or mainly the Air Force. Same thing would happen with the Army for a cyber force. And so these are all serious limitations that we have right now. Will we have these same limitations, say 5 or 10 years from now? I don't know. Can budgetary planning be made to do that? Maybe so. Is that something that we need to do to compete with China and other peer competitors? Maybe so, because China's already done something very similar to what you're talking about with their strategic support force, which is a major piece of their military, under which they've grouped all of their information assets and space assets into one large command. So these are serious considerations that I think have to be made at the policy level, up around Washington, to start thinking through those things if they want to do the budgetary fiscal planning out into the, say, 5 to 10 year span. I hope that kind of gives at least some idea.
Other one we've got here is a comment that says, when you say, I don't know if you can teach a computer to care, is 1, brilliant, and 2, what kind of edge case I'm asking about in this question. At what point, or in which cases, do the differences in organics, carbon versus silicon, make the use of the same classification structures more problematic than helpful?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So I think once you get to a certain level of, you can only take analogies so far, right? I think once you start to get into the really most basic, sort of atomized pieces, the analogy starts to break down. You can analogize this down from, kind of a theoretical, medical theoretical level all the way down to sort of that level of microbiome that I was referring to. But once you start to try to get below that, it can start to break down and become a little problematic. Whether or not that's the right way to do it, again, I'm just putting out something here that I believe can be meta theory and theory that can help us to at least move forward with this conversation and start to figure out from a scientific and theoretical point of view how to actually plan all of this and understand it. But it's certainly not perfect. Yes, sir.
Thinking, you talked about this as sort of a theoretical construct here, the metaverse taxonomy, the disparate pieces that went into it. So if I think about theory, I'll just grab one, the Clausewitz, claiming that towards continuation of policy by other means. That's, in some ways, it's useful to me, it's actionable. I can do something with that, say as a military strategist. It helps me understand what I'm doing with operations ultimately have got to support the political outcomes that our leaders are calling for. I'm sure you've been thinking about this. Can you give for instance, of what's, this is informative to me, but I'm not sure that I've gone where you've gone with it in terms of thinking about how does this theory help me understand or relate better to cyberspace or cybersecurity? Do you have a practical anecdote maybe?
Sure, absolutely. One of the things that I think of most often is JTF Ares. Any y'all familiar with JTF Ares? Essentially, the takedown of the cyber caliphate. All right. That was done by understanding how that cyber caliphate was acting and reacting to information within what I'm referring to, this sort of cyber meta-reality. They're able to trace information about recruiting, about the money they're using, cryptocurrency and other money that they were shifting here and there and yonder, and be able to track them in that way, and then be able to completely cut off the head of the snake of the cyber caliphate and bring them down. That's one kind of simple example of it. I'm sure you could probably go along and find a lot more complex examples of it going along, but that's just kind of one example.
If I could ask, thank you first off for that. That was very, very good. If you were to project to the future, do you have any thoughts that you could share with us what the future might be pulling or coming toward us as, and maybe how quickly it's coming at us?
Yeah, so you've probably all at least been a little bit exposed to things like artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning, quantum computing, nanotechnology. Kind of heard of some of those different pieces, parts of what's going forward as far as expanding technology is concerned, things that are on the cusp. There are some discussions that I've had recently over at the West Bay seminar with some of the students over there about space assets specifically, and also looking forward to space challenges like going to Mars, for instance. One example that I generally give, and maybe this kind of help encapsulate this a little bit, is right now we have rovers on Mars, right? We sent them there, but it takes 14 minutes round trip to be able to drive a rover forward, say 20 meters, all right? Now, with a rover, that's not a human being, it's a piece of machinery. If I'm driving this rover forward and I know that and I want it to go to the precipice of a cliff, all right, and I know by measurements given maybe from its little fly around, fun, or maybe from its raised camera, that it is 21 meters from the edge of that cliff, and I want to drive it forward. Well, I have to wait 14 minutes to find out whether or not it stopped and didn't go over the edge and crash my however many billion-dollar mission that has happened. You can't do that with human beings. I need to know immediately whether that crew has splatted on the surface of Mars or whether the parachute's deployed and they're there safely. The way that you're going to do that is with things like quantum mechanics, by quantum entanglement, by actually having repeaters that can actually instantaneously transfer data from one point to another over great distances to allow communication to happen instantaneously. Now, how far are we away from actually doing that? I don't know, but you better believe NASA's working toward it. You better believe China is working toward it. They're all working toward using that level of quantum entanglement between subatomic particles to be able to instantaneously transfer information past the electromagnetic spectrum with speeds that we just don't even understand yet. So that's one example of the direction from a space-based cyber capability that we're moving right now. That can expand also into instantaneous data transfer at the level to where we may not even need subsea cables anymore. If we could transfer massive amounts of data that quickly through space vehicles over line of sight, outside, like something at the level of Starlink, that would essentially leave undersea cables, subsea cables unnecessary, or at least as a backup. So those are some sort of 5 to 10 to 20 ideas of the outlook for the kind of technologies we're just beginning to really see come to some fruition right now.
We still have time. Any more questions, either online or from the room?
Well, thank you, everybody.
Well, thank you so much, sir. We greatly appreciated that, and want to thank all the attendees today, both in person and online, to this faculty roundtable series. Just stay tuned for news about a future event. And I do want to say a special thanks before I go to the team that put this on, to Ron Dial and his team, Sonny for the tech support, Ms. Cross, and for Justin, and also to our leadership, Dr. Ali and Ms. Barone, for providing the resources to us and the opportunity. So thank you again, and we will have this online and available for streaming at some point very, very soon. Thank you again.